They called her a liability. Not in those exact words. The men in Aldric Voss's world were too careful for that. But Marguerite Okafor heard it in every silence that followed her entrance into a room. The pauses too long, the glances dropped too quickly to their shoes. She was 31 years old, a size 18, and possessed of a laugh that could rattle the good crystal. And on the evening of October 4th, she became the wife of the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. The ceremony was held at the Voss estate in Summerlin, 12,000 square feet of Italian marble and controlled silence. The guest list read like a coroner's report of American organized crime. There were men from Chicago who hadn't left their zip codes in years. A woman from New Orleans who wore white and dared anyone to say something about it. A representative from what remained of the Florescu operation, still limping after last spring's unpleasantness. They all came because Aldric Voss had asked them to come, and refusing Aldric Voss was not the kind of decision a person made twice. Marguerite stood at the top of the staircase in a dress the color of champagne, and tried not to think about the fact that she had been chosen the same way one selects a financial instrument, for stability, for neutrality, for the fact that she had no family connections to any of the competing factions currently threatening to split the Nevada Syndicate in half. She was a civilian, a forensic accountant who had spent 7 years untangling offshore structures for a boutique firm in Henderson. She had no enemies. She had no alliances. She had a 401N and a cat named Biscuit and a signed lease on a 2-bedroom condo she would apparently now be vacating. She had no idea yet what else she had. Aldric met her at the bottom of the stairs. He was 53, silver at the temples, built like a man who had never stopped training even after he no longer needed to. He looked at her the way a chess player looks at a piece he has just moved into position, not unkindly, but with purpose, with calculation. "You look lovely," he said. "I look nervous," she said. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite a smile. "That's honest. I don't have a setting for anything else." He offered her his arm. She took it, and from the other side of the room she heard it, a woman's voice, low and varnished, with something ugly, leaning toward the man beside her and whispering just loudly enough, "Look at what he settled for." A ripple of quiet laughter. Marguerite did not look toward the voice. She kept her chin level and her hand steady on Aldric's arm, and she noted the woman's shoes. Louboutin ivory, scuffed at the left heel, and filed everything away the way she filed everything, quietly, completely, for later. The wedding reception lasted 4 hours. Marguerite drank sparkling water, ate exactly 2 canapés, and listened to every conversation happening within 12 feet of her. She was very good at seeming to do nothing while absorbing everything. It was the same skill that had made her exceptional at her job and invisible at every party she had ever attended. The wives of the syndicate men gathered around her twice, once to assess, once to dismiss. They asked her where she was from. Cincinnati, she told them. They asked what she did. She said accounting. One of them, a woman with cheekbones like architectural features, said, "Oh, how practical," in a voice that meant the opposite, and then they drifted away, and Marguerite watched them go and thought, "I have audited companies that laundered money through 4 different continents. I can find a number you tried to hide the way a bloodhound finds a bone. I know what your husband's holding company actually owns. But sure, practical." She didn't say any of that. She smiled and refilled her sparkling water. Aldric watched her from across the room for most of the night. She pretended not to notice. The first month of the marriage was a negotiation of silences. Aldric's estate was staffed by people who were loyal to him in ways that went beyond employment. A housekeeper named Rosario, who had been with the family for 22 years, a driver called Beach, who communicated primarily in eyebrow movements, a head of security named Thomas, who said good morning to Marguerite on her 3rd day and then looked faintly alarmed by his own sociability. She learned the rhythms of the house. She learned which rooms Aldric used and when, and she did not intrude on any of them. She set up her laptop in the east sitting room and went back to work. Her firm had agreed to a modified remote arrangement. She told them she'd relocated for personal reasons. Aldric found her there one evening, 3 weeks in, surrounded by spreadsheets and the remnants of a bag of salt and vinegar chips she had smuggled in from the kitchen. "You're working," he said. "I'm always working." He stood in the doorway for a moment, reading the screens over her shoulder without appearing to lean in. Then, Cayman structure? She glanced up. Delaware holding that feeds into 3 LLCs, 2 of which are inactive. The inactive ones are the interesting ones. He was quiet for a moment. "You're good at this." "The inactive ones are where people think they can hide things," she said. "They're almost never inactive." He left without another word. But the next morning, Rosario informed her that the East sitting room had been restocked with her preferred chips and a proper ergonomic chair, because apparently Aldric had noticed she'd been hunching. She told herself it meant nothing. She was good at telling herself things. The trouble had been building since before the wedding. Marguerite knew this the way she knew most things. Not because anyone told her, but because she could read a room and she could read a balance sheet, and she could see the places where the numbers didn't add up. Aldric was consolidating. 2 other factions within the syndicate didn't like what consolidation meant for their autonomy, and they had decided, without quite saying so, the way men in that world made all their decisions, that the problem was not the consolidation itself, but Aldric's fitness to lead. "A don who marries a nobody," they said, "is a don who's gone sentimental. A man who picks comfort over strategy is a man whose judgment has softened." Marguerite heard this, eventually, through the specific kind of osmosis that happens when people decide a woman is furniture. She was in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, eating toast, when 2 of the security staff walked through without noticing her at the table, and had a conversation she was quite sure they would have preferred she not hear. She finished her toast. She thought about the numbers she'd seen in the documents Aldric had left on the desk in his study, which she had not been invited to read, but which she had, out of professional habit, read anyway. She thought about the name that kept appearing in those documents, Lucio Strand, a man who ran the syndicate's transportation interests and who had been, until recently, one of Aldric's most dependable allies. She thought about the calls Aldric had been taking in the East Garden at odd hours, the ones where his voice went flat and careful the way it did when he was managing something he didn't like. She didn't say anything. She put her plate in the sink and went to work. 3 days later, Aldric sat across from her at the dinner table and said, "I need to ask you something, all right? Why are you still here?" She looked at him. "Where would I go? Back to Henderson, to your condo, to your cat?" He paused. "Biscuit." She hadn't told him the cat's name. She thought about that for a moment. "Biscuit is with my neighbor. He's fine. That's not what I asked." She set down her fork. Outside, the desert dark pressed against the windows. "I signed a contract," she said finally. "I don't break contracts. That's the only reason." She looked at him for a long moment. He was not an easy man to read. He had spent too many years making himself unreadable. But she had spent the last month watching him, and she was good at watching. She saw the thing he was asking underneath the thing he was saying. "No," she said, "it's not the only reason." He didn't press, but something changed very slightly in the architecture of his expression. They moved her out of the guest suite that night. She told herself, again, that it meant nothing. She was less convincing this time. The attack came on a Thursday, which felt wrong to Marguerite in the way only Thursday attacks can feel wrong. There's nothing remarkable about a Thursday, which somehow makes it worse. Aldric was in Chicago for a 2-day commission meeting. He had taken Beach and 2 of the security team. Tomas was supposed to have the remaining 4 men on rotation at the estate, plus a guard named Price at the East Gate, and another, a newer hire called Webb, stationed in the kitchen corridor. Marguerite was reading. She was in the library on the 2nd floor, a room she had quietly colonized over the past 6 weeks, with a cup of tea and a novel, and the particular contentment of a person who has learned not to need permission to be comfortable. It was 9:47 in the evening. The house was quiet. The quiet stopped. She heard it first as a sound that didn't fit. Not a crash, not a shout, but a thud with a strange, muffled quality coming from somewhere below and to the left. Then nothing for 4 seconds. Then glass breaking in a deliberate way, like a window being cleared rather than shattered. Marguerite put down her book. She did not panic. Panic, in her professional estimation, was for situations where you hadn't thought anything through yet. And she had been thinking things through her whole life. She reached under the chair cushion. She had done this quietly, 2 weeks ago, during a morning when the house was empty, and her hand closed around the Glock 43 she had placed there. She had also placed one in the kitchen, one taped under the second bathroom vanity, and one in the library's copy of the Oxford English Dictionary at P, because nobody ever looks things up after O. She had grown up in Cincinnati, yes, but before Cincinnati, before the accounting degree, before the career and the condo and biscuit, there had been a childhood that was not simple, a mother who believed in self-sufficiency with a kind of religious fervor, and a stepfather who had taught her everything he knew before he died, including that the difference between a person who survives and a person who doesn't is almost never strength. It's preparation. She had been preparing since day 3. She moved out of the library into the hallway. The house was laid out in a long central corridor, with rooms branching to either side. She had memorized this the first week, catalogued every shadow, every door that stuck, every floor that creaked. She knew this house better than anyone in it had thought to check. The first man came from the south staircase. He was moving quickly, dressed in dark clothes, and he had not expected to find anyone in the upper hallway, because the upper hallway was not supposed to be occupied. He had, Marguerite estimated, approximately 1 second to process what he was seeing before she made a decision that was neither hasty nor cruel, simply necessary. She used the wall. She dropped low and moved, and did the thing her stepfather had drilled into her on cold Saturday mornings in the parking lot in Blue Ash, Ohio, which was to never stand where you were expected to be standing. The first man was dealt with. She moved. The second man was on the east staircase, and he was better, more careful, more professional, the kind of person you hire when you want something done correctly rather than quickly. He cleared corners, he checked angles, he moved in the controlled, methodical way of someone who does this regularly. He had not accounted for the fact that Marguerite had the home court advantage and a detailed working knowledge of the estate's electrical panel, which she had also memorized, because of course she had. She killed the lights on the east wing. In the dark, preparation wins. The third man was in the kitchen, and this is where things became complicated in a way she had not anticipated, because by the time she reached the kitchen, quiet, controlled, having taken the servant's staircase in the dark with the confidence of someone who has mapped every step, she found that Webb, the new hire in the kitchen corridor, was already down. She checked his pulse. She did not like the reading. She noted his location, noted the exit points, noted the third man moving toward the back door and thinking, apparently, that the first 2 men would be right behind him. They were not right behind him. The third man got as far as the back terrace. Then it was over. The house was quiet again. Marguerite stood in the kitchen for a moment, in the dark, holding the Glock she had retrieved from behind the spice rack. She had placed one there, too, between the cumin and the smoked paprika, because who checks the spice rack? And she breathed, and she assessed herself the way you assess a piece of work. Systematically, without ego. She had a cut on her left forearm where she'd caught the edge of a cabinet. She had a bruise forming on her right knee. She was otherwise uninjured. Webb was going to need an ambulance. She called for one. Then she called Thomas, who answered on the first ring with a voice that told her he already knew something was wrong. She told him what had happened in the way she delivered all information, completely, in order, without editorializing. There was a long silence on the line. "Mrs. Voss," Thomas said. "Yes, are you? I need you to send someone to secure the south entrance and check the east gate. Price may need assistance, and Webb needs medical attention." She paused, and Thomas, "I found what I found in the kitchen corridor." That situation predates the breach. You'll want to account for your timeline." Another silence, then, "Yes, ma'am." She hung up and went back to the library to get her tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Aldric arrived home at 2 in the morning. She was still in the library because she had finished her book and had started a second one, and she saw no reason to sit in the kitchen being dramatic about the whole affair. She heard the front door, heard Tomas's voice, heard the particular quality of Aldric's footsteps. Not running, but not measured either. Something in between, something controlled but barely. He appeared in the library doorway. He looked at the cut on her arm, which she had cleaned, and wrapped in a bandage she'd found in the bathroom cabinet. He looked at the book. He looked at her face. She looked back at him and said nothing, because there was nothing immediately necessary to say. "Thomas told me," he said. "Then you're informed." He crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched down in front of her chair, which was an unusual thing for a man like Aldric Voss to do. She suspected he did not crouch in front of people as a general practice, and he took her bandaged arm very carefully in both of his hands and looked at it for a long moment. "You're all right," he said, like a man confirming something to himself. "I'm fine. 3 men, 3 professional hires, reasonably professional, yes, better than average." He looked up at her. "And you, I had time to prepare," she said. "And I know where things are. You hid weapons in my house." "In our house," she corrected, because it was the technically accurate thing to say, and because she noticed the way something moved in his expression when she said it. "And yes, I did, starting on day 3. He held her gaze for a long time. She didn't look away. "Strand," he said. "Lucio Strand commissioned this, yes. I've been looking at his financial structures for the past 2 weeks. He's been positioning himself to absorb the Nevada transportation contracts if you were no longer in the picture. There are 3 shell companies, a real estate trust in Scottsdale, and a payment made 6 days ago to a security contractor based out of Phoenix. That is, I would guess, where your guests this evening originated." She paused. "I've documented all of it. It's on your desk." Aldric stared at her. "I put it in a red folder," she added, "because I felt the situation warranted color-coding." He was very still for a moment. Then, for the first time since she had known him, Aldric Voss laughed. A real laugh. Not the controlled, social function version she had seen deployed at strategic moments over the past months, but something that came from somewhere actual. It lasted approximately 4 seconds and left his face slightly different than it had been before. "You investigated him," Aldric said. "I investigate everything. It's a compulsion. I've accepted it." He stood up, still holding her arm, and then seemed to realize he was holding it, and instead of letting go, he moved her hand and held it differently, the way a person holds something they have decided to keep. "Marguerite," he said. "Yes, I owe you an apology." She tilted her head. "For which part?" "For not telling you what you were walking into when I asked you to do this." "You didn't know what I was walking into either," she said. "And for the record, I knew it wasn't simple. I'm a forensic accountant. Nothing is ever simple." He looked at her for a long moment. And this time the look was different from all the previous ones. Different from the chess player look at the bottom of the staircase on their wedding night. Different from the studying a problem look across the dinner table. This look had something in it she hadn't catalogued yet, something she would need more time to properly understand. "What would it take," he said, "to make you stay?" She thought about Biscuit. She thought about the condo, the lease, the 2,000 square feet of life she had built precisely and carefully and alone. She thought about the east sitting room and the ergonomic chair and the chips, and the way he had stood in the doorway 3 weeks ago reading her screens with the focused look of a man who had finally found something interesting. "It would take honesty," she said, "about everything. The business, the risks, the things I'll need to know to be useful to you. Done, and I want Biscuit here." He considered this for exactly half a second. The cat, fine, and I want the east sitting room to myself between 8 and noon. It was always yours." She looked at him. He looked back. Outside the library windows, the desert was doing what deserts do in the small hours, vast and quiet and patient, keeping its own counsel. "Then I suppose I'll stay," she said. Lucio Strand was arrested 11 days later on charges that included conspiracy, fraud, and 3 counts that Marguerite's documentation made airtight enough to embarrass his entire legal team. The red folder on Aldric's desk had been thorough. There were prosecutors in 2 states who used words like meticulous and extraordinary, and, in one instance, almost unsettlingly complete. The Nevada Syndicate, faced with the evidence of what Strand had arranged and the further evidence of how it had failed, drew the obvious conclusions. The factions that had been murmuring about Aldric's judgment went quiet in the way that people go quiet when they have been shown, comprehensively, that they were wrong. Nobody mocked her at the next gathering. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it. She ate her canapés, this time more than 2, and she listened to every conversation in range. And when the woman with the architectural cheekbones drifted over and said, carefully and without warmth, "I understand you had quite the eventful week," Marguerite smiled and said, "It was fine. I was almost finished with my book anyway." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she raised her glass just slightly and moved away. Biscuit arrived on a Tuesday, in a carrier that had been transported with, by all accounts, extreme care, by a man named Beach, who had apparently had a full conversation with the cat during the drive and come to what he described to Rosario as an understanding. Marguerite opened the carrier in the east sitting room. Biscuit walked out, surveyed the room with the authoritative calm of a creature who has decided something is acceptable, and sat down directly on Aldric's copy of the Wall Street Journal. Aldric, standing in the doorway, looked at the cat. The cat looked at Aldric with the comprehensive indifference that cats reserve for the powerful. "He does that," Marguerite said. "Does he always choose the most expensive thing in the room?" Without fail. Aldric was quiet for a moment. "Smart animal." "He has good instincts," she said, "about what's worth his time." She did not look at Aldric when she said it, because she was giving him the information plainly and without performance, which was the only way she knew how to give anything, and she had decided, some time in the 11 days since a Thursday night had rearranged everything, that plain and without performance was what she had to offer, and she was no longer interested in apologizing for it. She felt him cross the room. She felt him stop beside her chair. He didn't say anything for a while, neither did she. Biscuit, on the Wall Street Journal, cleaned one paw with the methodical thoroughness of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. "The commission meeting," Aldrich said eventually. "Yes, I'm going back to Chicago next week for the reconvened session." A pause. "I'd like you to come." She looked up at him then. He was watching her with that look she was still cataloguing, the one she needed more time to understand, though she was starting to think she understood it more than she'd admitted. "As what?" she asked. "As what you are," he said. She thought about that for a moment. As what you are. Not an instrument. Not a neutral party. Not a liability or a trophy size 18 weight around an important man's neck, as what she was. "All right," she said. "I'll need to pack. Take whatever you need, and I'm bringing the red folder system. Color coding stays, obviously." She picked up her book. Biscuit migrated from the newspaper to her lap, with the decisive energy of an animal who has made a permanent decision. Outside, Vegas spread itself across the desert in all its ridiculous, luminous excess, and Marguerite Okafor, who had been called a liability, who had been whispered about at her own wedding, who had dealt with 3 professional assassins on a Thursday evening, and then gone back to her book, turned the page. She had always known her worth. She'd just been waiting for the room to catch up.